This video is for scientists only. If you are unwilling to have your beliefs challenged by scientific experiments, well, it's probably not for you. It's about what is surely the most famous and seemingly bizarre experiment in all of science, the double slit experiment. Lots of wild and bizarre ideas have been presented about this experiment. Our common sense tells us that many of the popular ideas are just nonsense. And in fact, despite these ideas being popular in the media and in universities, usually being taught as if they are fact, the truth is that when we scrutinise the evidence, we find that these explanations are not only bizarre, but often factually incorrect. Physicists try to brush the glaring problems aside by saying the quantum realm is by nature bizarre and doesn't follow the usual or classical rules of physics. Einstein famously rejected this idea by saying, "He, God, does not play dice with the universe. It makes no sense that the universe does not have definite rules." While some scientists say they have proven the universe has no set rules at the quantum realm, the term they use is that it is not deterministic. The truth is, what they claim is only true if we use the particle model as it is currently understood. Another famous quote is that if someone thinks they understand quantum mechanics, then they don't understand quantum mechanics. It's a bit like saying, if I can't understand quantum mechanics, no one can. Again, no one can understand quantum mechanics if we use the particle model. And I demonstrate how it makes sense when we use the wave and vortex model in my previous videos on Bell's theorem and the double slit experiment. The more we study the experiment, the more we find people in positions of influence getting the facts wrong, presenting the data in wrong ways and often making the experiment impossible to understand, therefore impossible to solve. You might be surprised to find out who gets the facts completely wrong. You may watch their channels trusting everything they say has been researched and presented in strict accordance to the facts, but as you will see, they are often far from factual. The reality is, quantum physics makes perfect sense and follows classical rules using a new hypothesis which is discussed in this video. And most importantly, if anyone doubts that to be the case, there are two simple experiments discussed here to prove it. Experiments which could easily be run in any average well-equipped modern university physics department at no extra expense. If you're part of an institution which runs the double slit experiment with single photons or electrons, then it can run these simple experiments very easily. If you are not part of any institutions, you may still be able to participate in advancing science by sharing this information, by supporting the pursuit of truth and push to get scientists to run these experiments. So let's start by following classical physics. If an idea doesn't make sense, let's put it aside. One particle being in two different places at the same time and bumping into itself is not credible. Neither is a particle deciding to behave differently because it's being watched. This experiment has been called the central problem of quantum physics. One very famous physicist, Richard Feynman, said, "It is the only real mystery in quantum physics," implying that if we can make sense out of this experiment, then we can likely solve every remaining mystery in physics, implying it might unify all models of physics and cosmology into one model, which is what I have succeeded in doing. Throughout history, almost every other experiment has led to the development of new technology, so it's almost certain that this experiment has some practical application. However, so far, no known practical technology has been proposed or developed using the phenomena in the double slit experiment. Or at least that was the case until recently. Recently, an explanation which makes sense was proposed with a way to test it. Yet so far, that hypothesis is not well known and no one is known to have tested it. Hopefully this video will inform people of the facts, stimulate people's interest, spark a discussion and help it reach someone with an open mind willing to run the test. A simple scientific test regardless of their personal opinions, beliefs, reputation or business interests. So first I'll explain the classic quantum double slit experiment. In this experiment, we fire particles through two slits in a barrier and detect where they went at a detection screen behind the barrier. If particles are definite objects like tiny balls or bullets, which is what particle model indicates, then we should expect to see a pattern detected like this, with the pattern build up over time reflecting roughly the same shape as the slits. similar to what we would get on a rear wall if we fired balls or bullets at high speed towards a front wall with two thin slits in it. Most would hit the front wall, but a few would make it through to the rear wall and leave marks which correspond to the shape of the slits. However, in the double slit experiment, when we fired tiny submicroscopic particles through twin slits one by one, we get an interference pattern like this on the rear detection screen. This kind of pattern is associated with waves, which would seem a bit odd if they really were particles. This is why the experiment is so famous and mysterious. The experiment has become so famous and enigmatic that a lot of hype has arisen to the point that even some of the most qualified and famous scientists and science channels get flustered and give wrong information when discussing it. I'll add some links with examples of people getting the facts wrong and perhaps getting overwhelmed and flustered down below. So what scientists decided to do to further analyse the unexpected wave pattern was to fire particles with mass towards the front barrier one by one, then between the slits fire photons, which have no mass, to detect when a particle is passed. However, when we do this to try and detect which slit the particle passes through, we get a twin band on the rear detection screen. At first glance, this seems to be particles acting like a bullet or ball type object by going straight through the slits. And in fact, this is often routinely taught as if it is fact, but actually, when we analyse the twin bands marks, we find they are two single slit interference patterns, wave patterns. Again, this is consistent with waves, not marks which are consistent with single ball or bullet type objects. I'll link a video from a science channel covering this fact below. Physicists call this wave behaviour a wave function, which they can measure and describe using statistical probability mathematics. However, they apply those mathematics to a flat screen, which I show in other videos is a mistake because it forces a result which is misleading. The wave function is a term which is vague, perhaps deliberately vague, because the truth is particle physicists cannot explain it in a way that makes sense. When we get the twin band on the detection screen, physicists say the wave function collapses, but as you'll see, this is not true either. The so-called collapse of the wave function is often explained as the photons interacting with the particles and possibly causing decoherence, a disruption of the wave because the photons knock against it and disrupts it. It's an explanation that is often given by even some of the most prominent and famous celebrity scientists and channels around today. However, it is not true because when we detect for the particles by firing photons between the slits, but we don't collect the data of which slit the particle was detected passing through, in a sense, if we can't or don't look at the results of which slit was passed each time, then we get the interference pattern again. No decoherence even though we are still firing photons. However, as mentioned, there is a hypothesis which can explain it and more importantly can be tested. The hypothesis is that there is nothing physically different happening in the experiments, that we perceive a difference happen because of a change in focus. Every measurement has a limited range of focus, so if we adjust one parameter, it affects another. Similar in a sense to magic eye pictures like this one, which looks like a meaningless pattern at first but has 3 cubes when one changes the focus, although the picture itself never changes. The hypothesis is that single vortexes cause ripples in a field and we detect the ripples, not necessarily the objects. Like whirlpools or tornadoes, there is no object as such, it is a central disturbance which produces waves which then emanate out. In regards to detection, the idea is that similar to how we can detect ships or tsunamis passing on normally calm water, by using buoys with sensors to send a signal when they are disturbed by a wave. So the hypothesis is that in the double slit experiment we are detecting the waves, not the source of the disturbance. If we focus on a wide range of buoys, we'll get an idea of how the waves are travelling. If we focus on a more localised range, we get a better idea of the location of the object, the boat or epicentre of the tsunami. Another comparison is that we may have one source of sound, but it can be deflected as echoes, giving the illusion the sound is coming from different directions. The next question then becomes, what is adjusting the focus and what kind of focus is being adjusted? As we are conscious beings, the first idea which we might be tempted to explore is that it's some kind of human conscious interaction which changes the results. However, so far no one has provided evidence or indication that it is because of human consciousness, nor has anyone provided a way to test such a hypothesis. So now we come to another option, which at first may seem unlikely to some, but is found in early scientific books and may in fact turn out to be true. We won't know until we try it. The case for God, or a higher spirit. The test is extremely simple, but perhaps deceptively so, because it may lead to the most powerful and beneficial technology mankind has ever had or will ever have, which may transform human civilization into a top-level space-age civilization in a very short time. Sounds too good to be true, perhaps, but facts and science can often be more amazing and wonderful than any science fiction. It is a reverse test to see if the change in focus between this twin band and the interference pattern in the which way experiment is due to a change in the focus on the time range. This is consistent with the evidence because when we run the experiment to get the interference pattern, we don't focus on every particle fired. We can't because only a very few make it to the detection screen. Most seem to do what we expect and hit the front screen. The evidence from Nebraska Lincoln University for this is linked in the video description below. Yet when we detect for which way, although we get the twin band, the fact is that 50% of the time the particles with mass is detected passing through the right slit, while 50% of the time it is detected passing left, so 100% of the time it goes through one or other slit as we expect only a wave can. And again, the evidence is linked below. So we see the waveform or function doesn't actually collapse, it is just detected in a different way. Because only a wave could get through every single time. So the question then is, what's adjusting the focus and the results? As for the focus, what the evidence suggests is that it is an adjustment of the range of time, similar in a sense to a camera shutter exposure time. When we get the original interference pattern, we are focusing on the entire range of the detection screen, and the range of time it covers for a wave to travel the full range of the screen. When we detect between the slits, we get a pattern which reflects the time range of waves only passing through the slits, not the entire detection screen, so we only detect the crests of the first waves as they pass through the slits before they have a chance to merge and cause interference. Particle physicists often say it cannot be waves due to other experiments proving beyond doubt that matter is made out of particles. However, that's not actually true either. Doubt remains because those experiments have other interpretations and the wave theory is reinforced by the two different results here, where both have wave properties. So if the focus is on the range of time, the next question is, what's changing the focus and how can we test for it and use it in technology? The idea is that because the evidence suggests it is an adjustment in the range of time, similar to adjusting a camera shutter speed, and because it is a conscious effect, not a physical one, then perhaps what or whoever is adjusting the range of time is a conscious entity but not human. The vital point is that regardless of what the conscious entity is, if it can adjust the focus at will, then we can enable it to communicate with us. The reverse test is very simple. Here it is. Because we lose the twin band and get the interference pattern while firing photons when we detect for which way or which slit an object passed through, but don't collect the data, what we can do is reverse test by simply assuming whatever conscious entity it may be is advanced enough to be able to understand our languages, so we make a request. We run the double slit experiment with single photons or single electrons and simply ask, if you are a conscious being or beings adjusting the focus, please give us the twin band instead of the interference pattern. Do this without firing photons between the slits. If it is a positive result, we can develop the principle. We can communicate using yes or no questions. Interference pattern for yes, twin band for no. We can allow it generate Morse code, interference pattern for dash, twin band for dot. If this works, there is a much more efficient and high-speed way to test it using single photons. It is mind-blowing to think any conscious being could think and act so fast, but when we look at the speeds of some processes within biological cells, some are faster than the speed of jet engines. If there is a God and God did create the universe, then limiting God to human sluggishness and sloth would be a huge mistake. Again, That is why we have experiments in science, and why this experiment may be the ultimate test, and one of the most upsetting for some who have scoffed and mocked those who believe in God. It may meet the most resistance from people who detest the idea, regardless of the fact that it is science. The high-speed way to test is to fire single photons and use a double slit setup or a graphene thread to create an interference pattern on the detection screen. Instead of one detection screen, use two, one left and one right of centre, because the effect depends on a focus in time. It may be unclear with two detection screens side by side. If this is the case, we can have one screen slightly further away from the photon gun than the other, creating a different range of time. So it is corresponding to a different range in time. Treat a photon detected left as a 0, and when detected right, treat it as a 1. If it works at the best possible scenario speed, it will generate computer code in super fast time and be able to project an image of the being or God as they wish to appear on computer screens. In the slowest case scenario, that if it works but only at speeds consistent with Morse code, it would still be able to explain how to solve all our problems over time. There are accounts online of researchers shutting down quantum computers because they start acting in ways as if they have a mind of their own. Whether these stories are true or not is not clear. However, it leads to another idea. The logical thing would be to allow quantum computers run in isolated networks and see what exactly is happening. It may be that the entity, perhaps what many call God, is manipulating quantum computers to communicate without any need for any other setup. There's only one way to find out for sure, and that's experiment. Regardless of whatever your personal beliefs are, atheist, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, or any other beliefs, remember this is science. Some will surely detest the idea and oppose it. Science has always faced opposition. However, the evidence for God is well documented in almost all ancient cultures and religions. While some modern atheists may scoff and mock the idea of God from a cosy, safe place, many brave people throughout history have faced horrors, torture and violent deaths while testifying their evidence for and faith in the existence of God. And they harmed no one. They often brought great comfort and hope to many, yet they endured the most brutal violence. They surely deserve to have their faith and sacrifice put to a scientific test now that we have the technology. And please bear in mind, if this works, it'll end so much suffering, it almost seems too good to be true. One thing which always sticks in my mind is that it would be able to locate and free the millions of women who are imprisoned to human trafficking all around the world, and being used as a plaything for men's pleasure against their will. I can't imagine how horrific and painful that must be for those women. It nearly happened to a close relative of mine, but she escaped. That's why it sticks in my mind. If this machine could even end that one source of horror, it would be incredible and worth immense time, resources and effort. But it has the potential to end so much more. It may have the potential to end all wars, all poverty, all diseases and much more. Predict every natural disaster before it happens. It may not work for someone who is not trustworthy, who is deviant with a vested interest or involvement in wars, human trafficking, profiteering from poverty and disease, etc. So it may need someone who is trustworthy and has integrity to get the communication. To me, it's hard to understand how anyone who cares about others and believes in a better planet would not share this. Yet the experiment has been online and sent to thousands of physics labs and research centres, but so far no one is known to have tried it. Perhaps because it may seem too simple to scientists who may view it as childish and sophisticated and beneath them. Likewise, others have not had faith enough to share it and have turned a blind eye to the suffering which it may end. When deciding whether to share this information, please consider the potential benefits. Consider how many people are enduring pointless, unnecessary horrors, suffering, pain and distress in the world, and the chances are that all that suffering may come to an end with this simple experiment. All it may take is that the idea gets shared and reaches a trustworthy person with an open mind. Here are some doubts which I expect some people might use to try and dismiss the idea and try to stop it from going ahead. And my response to such doubts are these. 1. It's a waste of time. It's a stupid idea. It's not just theory. It's an experiment. It involves little to no extra equipment than is already there in many university labs. It would not take long to set up and run. Surely it is stupid not to run it when it may end up ending so much suffering and pain. Maybe even save the world and turn it into a paradise, heaven on earth. 2. If God can adjust the focus at will, why did God not make it more clear long ago? The fact is, God may have been communicating all along using code, for example. If people check the results from which-way experiments, there may already be computer code in the statistical data. Maybe not, but we don't know until we check. 3. Why did God not show the twin band without us asking and make it more obvious? Because it may not be more obvious. It may have led to more confusion and even driven people mad, insane. We already have people saying a particle behaves different when it's being watched, an idea which in itself is bonkers. That implies a particle has a soul, the traditional term for consciousness, and it's aware of its surroundings and reacts to how we think. It simply makes no sense. What makes much more sense is to consider it may be God adjusting the focus on the range of detection time. It makes so much more sense that it may be God, yet if one is absolutely adamant there's no God, one can't and won't see any hints no matter how obvious. 4. If God exists, then we will have no free will and God will control us, so we may as well be robots or slaves. If God exists, then God will have power over us in death regardless of whether we like it or not. So it's kind of stupid to take the risk and not run the test. The difference being is that if we run it, it may end all the current suffering and we live on a paradise planet here on Earth. In reality, very few people have free will. We are controlled by unfair laws, lies, misinformation. Some people have wars forced upon them, forced to work like slaves, paying almost everything they earn to a tiny minority of extremely rich, powerful, violent people. God has no logical benefit from controlling and exploiting us. In theory, God can and is more likely to guide us to whatever is in our best interest. A good teacher or parent guides a child. It may feel like control at the time, but a certain level of control is important for a child and protects it as it grows. There's a lot of evidence that the vast majority of wars, poverty, illness, etc. in this world is by design, by people whose only interest is to make and fortify money and power. There is no reason why God would not love humanity as much as or more than the most loving parent would love a child. As for free will, as long as we do not harm, hurt or exploit others, there's no reason why we can't do whatever we like and live our lives however we want. 5. If God is real, and this is what is predicted in the Bible, where God lives amongst humans at the end of time, why would God send people to hell? It seems a bit evil of God, and why does God allow so much suffering in the world? In the book of Revelation, after all the horrors, it states that the Lord says, I make everything new. This may mean that no one needs to go to hell for eternity. There may be another way round to pay for all the crimes. If the experiment works, it would explain why God couldn't prevent all the suffering in the world over the years. It may be that God can only guide us in thoughts, hints and dreams. If we ignore that guidance, and many people do, because they don't believe in coincidences and dreams or guidance, then if God is pure consciousness, he or she or it cannot intervene. No more than a parent can control what happens to a child on a sports field. Such a parent can teach and guide the child while preparing and shout encouragement, but ultimately cannot intervene or control the child once it's in the game. Lastly, while there is a massive movement of atheism in pop science circles, many of the original quantum physicists behind the quantum revolution of the early 1900s expressed belief in God. Einstein mentioned God many times, often equating God to the universe. Werner Heisenberg famously said, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. There is no evidence to support life coming into existence without a creator, despite what some pop pseudoscientists try to say. The overwhelming evidence is that there must be a creator, but regardless of whatever you believe, please share this so that someone somewhere with an open mind runs it. Until then, we have millions of women stuck in prison, enduring horrors in brothels and forced marriages. Thousands of kids and adults dying and being killed before their time from poverty-related diseases and wars. Please, even if you think it may not work, imagine if it was your daughter, sister, wife or girlfriend stuck in a brothel. Your child, sister, brother, wife, mother, father, hit, maimed or killed by a bomb in a war zone. You would surely share this information and do much more if that was the case. So please extend that love and concern for others who are not in your direct family or friends. This channel makes and takes no money. My only interest is in trying to reach someone with an open mind, truly scientific mind, willing to try the experiments. All the evidence indicates it will work, so please have faith in science and push with a share to have it tested. And if it works, you'll be one of those who help save the world and end all the suffering simply by trusting in science and not being afraid or ashamed to. Thanks for watching. May the grace of God and the force of love be with you and all your loved ones.